Hi, and welcome to the Stock Scores Market Minutes for November 13th, 2017. This week, my topic, expect failure. Then my regular weekly market analysis. And finally, the trade of the week on RLOG. Well, trading is simple, but it is not easy. As traders, we will inevitably suffer from failure. In fact, we fail more than we succeed. Most of the strategies I have attempted to develop have failed. I often have days when I fail on lots of trades. But what separates those who are successful as traders from those who aren't is the ability to overcome and deal with failure. We can't do the same things over and over and over again and expect a different outcome. If something isn't working, you have to change it. You need to learn from your failure and embrace the lessons it gives. All right, let's do this week's market analysis. Here is the S&P 500 chart going back 30 days, 60 minutes at a time. And I've talked about this before, but notice the volatility is wider than it was before. That shows perhaps a little more nervousness. The bottoms are rising from left to right, so the buyers are in control, but we're not really seeing as much of an upward trend. We're getting a little bit more choppy in here. So again, there's some signs that the buyers are losing their motivation, getting a little complacent. On the long-term chart, we have a very tight upward sloping channel. And this week we make what's called a doji in candlestick parlance. And that is when the market closes at more or less the same price it opens. You can see that there's no color to that. And that is a sign of indecision. So there is some sense that maybe the bulls are getting, again, tired. There's no break of trend by any means. Until we get a break of trend, I don't think we should be widespread sellers, but something to watch for. And if we do get some trend lines starting to break, then you want to start to take some money off the table, particularly on the high-flying stocks. And that is key. Most of the stocks in the market actually aren't doing that well. It's the large cap stocks that are heavily weighted in the indexes that are leading the way. And those are the ones that are going to suffer from profit taking. Moving along to the Russell 2000, speaking of areas of the market that haven't participated in the bull trend, there you can see we had a little bit of an upward move through September, and now we're locked in this flag pattern. The slope of this is much shallower than this, and that is why it's not a bearish market. It's the market taking a break. We had a run up, now the market's taking a break, and what we want to watch for is a break to the upside as an indication that the buyers are interested again in the small caps. They haven't been interested in them for 5 or 6 weeks, but I think it's going to come back given that the trend into that flag pattern was up. Moving along to the Canadian market, you can see that we've got a nice upward trend line. We ran away from it, we pulled back, and now it looks to me like we're building a sort of sideways pattern here, an ascending triangle, which is optimistic. That's great, but it's moving sideways. If we get a break of trend to the downside, then I want you to be a little bit cautious and maybe take some money off the table if you see breaks in individual stocks. But for now, we're really just seeing a market that's taking a break after some decent gains over the last 6 or 7 weeks. Remember, however, that in real terms, in US dollar terms, this market has not gained that much because the Canadian dollar has fallen at the same time. And again, we have one of those dojis there, a sign of indecision, and so that could lead to a little bit of a pullback given the gains that we've made so far. TSX Venture is slowly drifting higher, not a lot of excitement, very shallow upward trend, but still it's an upward trend. We've got some rising bottoms. So I would say this market is not hurting you if you find stocks on the TSX Venture to trade. It's just not really helping either. It's a case where if there's an individual story that has got something going on and there's volume coming into the stock, then it's probably worth taking a look at. On the Treasury bond market, we had a little bit of a sell-off late in the week this past week, and that's why we have a red week for the weekly chart. But it's really just a market stuck in a sideways range. There's no break out of this trading range, and so really nothing to report here. It's kind of a boring bond market. US dollar went somewhat oversold, and now it's bounced back. If I draw a straight line across there, you see that that's where we are getting stuck at resistance. So the question now is, do we fall back and build a rising bottom? Do we fall back and go through that support? Or do we kind of take a break here and then ultimately break the downward trend line? So that's what you want to watch for in the next week or two. What is it going to be? I think we'll probably see a little bit of a pullback, but ultimately break the downward trend line. But it's not in the cards until you actually get the break. So don't be too optimistic on the US dollar just yet. On the gold market, it is boring, sideways trading action. Investors don't care about gold. They'd rather trade things like Bitcoin and stocks. And that's the case right now with gold. It's just nobody is really interested. It's a complacent market for gold. Oil has had a great week this week. It started the week with some good strength on Monday. And so you can see that this upward trend went parabolic and it's coming into resistance over here. So it's got a little bit more upside, but not much. And I think at that point, it's going to get stuck. We may even be stalling at these price peaks over here. So my expectation is short term, oil needs to pull back a little bit. It got a little overbought this week and it's due for a little bit of a pullback. That doesn't mean it's in dire straits where there's going to be sustained weakness. It's just a little bit too emotional on the upside and probably due for some pullback. On the fear side, had a little bit of a jump up in fear, but gosh, how many times have we had jump ups in fear and it hasn't materialized into anything? I would say something to watch here. It shows that there's a little bit of uncertainty building among investors, but until you get some real volume coming in, I wouldn't get too worried about the fear factor. So bullish on both time frames for US stocks, bullish on both time frames for Canadian. Gold neutral long-term, short-term neutral, oil neutral long-term, coming into that long-term resistance. It's still in a bull market short-term, but I'd be worried that it's due for a pullback. Stocks continue to drift higher. There is some increase in volatility, which is good for traders, but it also demonstrates nervousness among investors. We want to watch for breaks of trend for a short-term exit signal, particularly in some of those very steep upward trends that we see in the large cap stocks, particularly in tech. Investors are complacent about gold. Oil has rallied strong, but is now hitting resistance, and fear is just increasing slightly. All right, let's go on to the trade of the week. This is another great example of the action candle indicator. I bought RLOG right there on that day using my action candle. This is very similar to last week's trade of the week, did the same thing. And it was boring for 17 or 18 days, I think. Started uptick a little bit. You can see the volume was coming in and then the big jump right there. And I ended up selling it on that day. Good thing because it actually pulled back quite sharply the following day, but it just demonstrates again how the abnormal activity tends to predict the big moves. And so to find those, we have a scan on StockScores that will identify those kinds of stocks, and I also have indicators for TradeStation that will do that. So those are things that are available to my students. You can go to the trader training page on StockScores to learn more about that. Well, hope you've enjoyed the video. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, tell your friends, and most importantly, have a great week in the market. Trade well.